Author Toby Lester came to a bookstore in Little Italy on February 23rd to present his acclaimed new book, Da Vinci's Ghost, about Leonardo's fascination with the perfect form, the circle, and his now famous drawing of the circle in a square and a man with outstretched arms within it, representing the perfect symmetry of the human form. The drawing is called Vitruvian Man, and here is author Toby Lester speaking about it in Little Italy.
I'm Toby Lester. I'm the author of Da Vinci's Ghost, about Leonardo da Vinci and his famous Vitruvian Man, the man in the circle and the square. The picture was drawn in 1490, or at least that's what the scholars believe. And I've taken a great interest in the picture, and in fact, when I began looking into it, realized that nobody had ever written at length about it, so I decided to try to reconstruct the story of the picture as best I could. It's a very visual story. It turns out that Leonardo didn't summon the picture out of the blue. He was working in a tradition and against a tradition that involves all sorts of things, art, architecture, philosophy, and much more. What I ended up writing was a book that is really two stories: the story of Leonardo and what he was up to in the years and the decades before he drew the picture in Florence and then Milan, and then also the bigger story of the Vitruvian Man, this figure, and more importantly, ideas embedded in the picture, which ended up taking me way back to ancient Greece and Rome. And I try to carry the idea of Vitruvian Man through late antiquity into the Middle Ages and right into the Renaissance, into Florence and then Milan, where it meets Leonardo. There's a lot of symbolism that's obviously buried in the image that Leonardo would have been working with, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously. The circle and the square obviously are the powerful symbols in ancient Greece and Rome. The circle represented, to oversimplify things, it represented the divine and the cosmic and the perfect. And the square had much more human and earthly connotations. Best shorthand I can think of is that if you wanted to make sense of the cosmos, the circle, you had to square it, and by square it, you might say, draw two perpendicular lines through it the way you do when you find the cardinal directions in the sky. You're effectively drawing a right angle in the middle and orienting things. You're making sense of the world on the earth. That's the kind of symbolism that would have been implicit in this picture, and Leonardo would have been working with. Whether or not he actually was investing it with all sorts of other symbolic meaning isn't clear. But the picture itself was originally a description that appears in the work of Vitruvius, the Roman architect who worked in the 1st century BC. Vitruvius didn't illustrate his text, which was a work called 10 Books on Architecture, but he did say that human proportions could be made to fit inside a circle and a square. And in saying that, he was being sort of literal. He said if you put a compass point at the human navel, you could outstretch your arms and legs and draw a circle around the body. By the same token, you could also use a set square and draw a square around the outstretched arms and body of the human figure. But he was also alluding to the idea of the microcosm, which was a powerful idea in ancient Greek thought, ancient Greek and Roman thought, but also in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. The gist of it was that the human body represents a kind of miniature model of the cosmos. It contains all the design principles of the cosmos, all the proportional relationships that are implicit in the design of the cosmos, and that if you can understand the human body, you can understand the cosmos, and vice versa. You can kind of get a sense of what is going on in the cosmos. You're going to have a better relationship to the human body and a better understanding of things like medicine. So in the course of writing about Leonardo, and as he develops in Florence and then moves to Milan, I also make a lot of digressions to talk about things like astrology and medicine, and how ideas received from the ancient world made their way into the Middle Ages and would have been in the air as Leonardo was drawing this picture. So in the end, I found that the picture is this extraordinarily effective and interesting compression of visual information. And Leonardo really thought in those terms. He believed images were much more powerful and effective ways of capturing and compressing and conveying scientific information and even spiritual information. And this picture in particular, I think, is a real representative of that kind of thought on his part. He went on to do all sorts of other things, and in a way, in his later career, he left some of these ideas about ideal beauty and proportion behind. In studying the human body, he began to dissect real bodies and to draw them in very different ways. So in a way, what to me is most interesting about the picture is that he is sort of straddling the divide between his early career and his late career, but also medieval ideas and Renaissance ideas. And this picture, to me, offers a kind of uniquely useful and powerful way of looking at this moment in time in around 1490, when Leonardo's in Milan, when it seems to him that he might be able to apply himself hard enough to all of his studies and figure out everything. It's a real grand ambition, but he seems to have had it. He never finished anything in that vast, endless project, but few of us would have had the resolve or dreamy nature to even attempt it.
Did Leonardo express, either in words or in his writing, his views towards the circle and the square?
Not really, but he wouldn't have had to, because it was implied in the kinds of works that he was illustrating. Vitruvius himself, who wrote the passage that Leonardo was illustrating in that picture, only said basically the human figure can be contained in a circle and it can be contained in a square. He didn't have to say anything more, though, because his viewers and his readers would have understood the symbolism that was implied in all those. And then all of that carried down to Leonardo's time, and the same thing would have applied. There was a lot of revival of Greek learning, Roman learning at the time, and the ideas were in the air.
So he, as a very notable individual, through his work expressing the importance of the circle and the circle within the square, what has your investigation, your study said to you that the power and the meaning and the impact of that imagery throughout history?
Well, I don't know how deeply he thought specifically about those two shapes and their very different symbolic resonances, but it was almost ready-made material that was presented to him that he was working with. I do think that in putting those two together, he was making a very specific statement. Vitruvius didn't say that you had to overlay the circle on the square. That was something that was a Renaissance innovation. In fact, nobody tried to illustrate the Vitruvian idea until the Renaissance directly. And I think it kind of captures a Renaissance spirit, namely that the human body and the human mind can contain within itself things that are both cosmic and human, and in fact they come together in a way it was believed that they came together in no other creature.
As a result of Vesuvius and Leonardo, I mean, the circle and the square become more conscious to others who very much made use of those shapes very, very specifically because of those groundbreaking works on their part?
Probably more as a result of Vitruvius than Leonardo. The idea of Vitruvian Man in 10 books on architecture by Vitruvius was illustrated again and again. It's not at all clear that Leonardo's picture was seen by many people. After he died, it kind of disappeared and wasn't revived and made really kind of public until about 1770. So I don't think it's easy to make the case that Leonardo's musings on circle and square had much influence at all, at least in the centuries after he died.
Do you think these concepts are still having a powerful impact on our society and art today?
Well, what's kind of fascinating to me, and I can't really explain, is the hold that this picture has on people. And I think, to a certain extent, the reason that the picture is so powerful is because it brings those shapes together so well and combines them with the human form. And it's a kind of nonverbal message that speaks to people. Exactly what it's saying is up to the viewer, and a lot of people interpret it in different ways.
Although maybe it's not your area of specific expertise, do you think it has also a powerful psychological impact on humans seeing those forms?
I would have to think so. I mean, it's almost like you can go way back beyond the Romans and see people combining those two shapes. There's something that triggers a kind of psychological response in humans for sure.
So, final question. As a result of your work on this book, how would you characterize your appreciation of Leonardo, that maybe more so than you had before you started investigating and writing?
Well, everybody told me to expect to be fascinated by him, and I was. And a couple of things surprised me. I mean, he's obviously a genius in all sorts of ways, and was involved in so many different subjects that alone is fascinating. He was very prescient and foresaw all sorts of things, and was able to anticipate developments that others didn't. But one of the things that really gave me a new sense of him was also how indebted he was to ideas that came before him, and that's partly what this book is about, and that's kind of what that picture is about as well. He's having a relationship with an ancient Roman and trying to work out what that Roman was saying in visual form. So that really makes me feel like it gives us another look at Leonardo, not Leonardo the kind of bearded visionary who transcended the age, but in fact younger guy who was still trying to figure out who he was, who was amazingly talented in all sorts of ways, but was blind and made mistakes, and was groping his way toward an understanding of everything he studied.
All right, thank you. That's great. Thank you. Great.
Saw this image, and the one surviving manuscript that still has Leonardo's notes in it that we know is Leonardo's manuscript is the one that has this in it.
And the significance of the circle and the square. There's no square in this one. Why? Oh yeah, there it is. So what is it? Why do we? The circle I get, I guess, because the circle is just perfect. But why is square?
Well, the short answer is it had sort of connotations of the earthly and the human. In a lot of the Roman thinking that they talk about in the book a fair bit, you can imagine that if you look up at the cosmos, it's circular, it's sort of hard to make sense of and to even orient yourself in. If you square the circle, take the horizon and square it and put the cardinal directions along two axes, then you're making sense of it and you're bringing it down to earth, and then you can now build your
Do you have
city.
examples of circling, of squaring a circle?
Well, I can give you
Except for this one.
a general idea. So this is from a Roman land surveyor's manual. This is the kind of thing Vitruvius would have worked with land surveyors. This is the medieval and ancient model of the cosmos, where it's a set of concentric spheres with the Earth in the center not moving. But you've got this idea of the horizon. You kind of take it square and bring it down to Earth, and then you draw these two lines. This is how you would design your town, by literally orienting things. That's east, that's west, that's north, that's south. So implicit in even diagrams.
So once you've got a circle, then, oh, go ahead.
So this is the medieval Christian, but also Muslim and Jewish idea of the microcosm in diagrammatic form. Man, the world, and the year. The circle implies all these cosmic things, but then you've got these elements that are squaring the circle, like the four material elements: earth, water, air, and fire. They make up the cosmos, but they also make up the body. Earth is the bones and flesh, blood is the water, air is the breath, and fire is what
That comes in fours, but that's sort of square.
the seasons also. So it's yoking together in this image, time and space. And this kind of idea, it was very common and was reiterated in all sorts of different ways. And it would, if you draw a circle and a square in a number of contexts, you're going to be applying this kind of idea of the microcosm.
Okay, so that's our first attempt to put pictures onto Vitruvius's words. Now we meet the best friend.